学友の皆様、こんにちは。メロです。Hello everyone, I'm Melo, and welcome back. Well, we've finally reached the last episode of this little series. If you've watched the previous episodes, thank you so much. I honestly didn't expect this journey to turn into quite such a long story. Today, I'd like to tell you what happened after the interview.How I somehow survived the waiting period, and how I eventually discovered that I'd actually passed Eiken Grade 1. After the interview, I felt wonderfully relieved. I remember thinking, that's it, naturally, I celebrated the most sensible way possible. I went for Chinese food. Excellent decision, right? On my way home,I noticed an elderly fortune teller sitting by the roadside. I'm not normally the sort of person who visits fortune tellers, but I thought, why not? So I sat down. She looked at me for a second. Then she said,
あんた受かるよ。
I was like, what? Absolutely no.Absolutely impossible. Still, those words refused to leave me alone. When I got home, I made a very sensible decision. I told myself, don't calculate your score. 5 minutes later, I was calculating my score. Honestly, I have absolutely no self-control. I estimated my marks, crossed them, changed them, calculated everything again. Then I calculated it one more time, because apparently I believed the numbers might improve if I stared at them long enough. The speaking test is marked in 4 areas: short speech, interaction, grammar and vocabulary, pronunciation. At first, I thought, probably not. But after checking everything several times, something rather alarming happened. It actually looked possible. And that was the problem. Because my estimated score wasn't comfortably above the pass mark, it wasn't comfortably below either. It was annoyingly close. 1 point. Everything depended on 1 point. If I'd been slightly too generous, I'd failed. If I'd been realistic, I'd passed. Those few weeks were probably the longest of my life. Every morning I thought, I've definitely passed. By lunchtime, absolutely not. By dinner, well, pass. I wasn't studying. I wasn't relaxing. I was simply arguing with myself over and over and over again. Honestly, I think I became my own least favorite conversation partner. And then the day finally arrived. Results day. I'd had my phone ready well before the results were due. Perfectly calm, perfectly relaxed. Absolutely not. The moment the results appeared online, I opened the website. And there it was. Pass. I simply stared at the screen. Then I stared at it again, and then one more time, just in case the word pass had somehow changed its mind. It hadn't. I really had passed by the narrowest of margins, which still counts. I'll happily take it. Naturally, I started telling people, quite a lot of people, including several who were probably thinking, I'm delighted for you, although I haven't the faintest idea what Eiken Grade 1 actually is. Even after seeing the result online, I still wasn't entirely convinced. I kept thinking, there must be some mistakes. So I waited for the official results to arrive. When the envelope finally came, I read it once. twice, 3 times. Yes, still passed. And at that point, I finally allowed myself to believe it. But there was still one mystery. How on earth had I actually managed to pass? Fortunately, the school report had the answer. And that is where the story becomes rather interesting. Fortunately, the school report had the answer. When I looked at it, I genuinely laughed. Not because I did brilliantly. Quite the opposite. Before the results came out, I'd tried to predict my own scores. Surprisingly, I wasn't far off. I thought my pronunciation would be a little higher though. It turned out to be 1 point lower. On the other hand, I thought my speech would be 1 point lower. It turned out to be 1 point higher. So, in the end, my overall prediction was almost exactly right, which was slightly annoying. I'd be hoping I'd underestimated myself. Then, I looked at the full score breakdown. Short speech, interaction, grammar and vocabulary, pronunciation, and suddenly everything made sense. My speech wasn't brilliant. In fact, it only scored, half the available marks. Yet, I still passed. That was probably the biggest surprise of all. It taught me something I wish I'd known before the interview. The interview isn't judged on your speech alone. Interaction matters, grammar matters, vocabulary matters, pronunciation matters. They all work together. So, if your speech doesn't go exactly as you'd hoped, please don't assume you've failed. You may have done much better than you think. Looking back now, I actually think the speech is the easiest part to improve. Grammar takes years, vocabulary takes years, pronunciation, well, perhaps a lifetime. But learning how to organize a 2-minute speech, that's something you can practice. So if I ever take the interview again, I know exactly where to focus. Oddly enough, that's quite encouraging. If I'm honest, I still don't think my interview was particularly impressive. I wasn't wonderfully fluent. I didn't use spectacular vocabulary. And when I walked out of the room, I certainly wasn't thinking, well, that was magnificent. Not even remotely. But the 2 interviewers were genuinely kind. They created such a relaxed atmosphere that I stopped feeling, tense surprisingly quickly. At one point, we even chatted about the fact that I had to take an early morning Shinkansen to get there. Now, I still have absolutely no idea whether that helped. I rather suspect it didn't, but I'd like to think they saw someone who wasn't perfect yet genuinely loved learning English, someone who would probably still be studying long after the exam was over. Or perhaps I'm giving myself far too much credit? Who knows? Either way, I'd like to say thank you for listening so patiently to my rather imperfect English. The people around me were almost as happy as I was. Someone for friends even organized a little celebration. I love you guys. My grandmother gave me
おめでとう。
ありがとう。
I decided to spend it on something I'd wanted for quite a while. A Kindle. Possibly the most educated shopping trip I've ever made. Every time I read an English book on it, I think of my Nan, grandmother, So in a way, she's still helping me study English. Oh, every single day. A little bit creepy though. Another close friend gave me this enormous amethyst shield. It's absolutely beautiful, isn't it? Another friend knows me rather too well. Instead of flowers, she bought me a little mushroom ornament. Honestly, I think my friends have accepted that my flat is decorated somewhere between an old eccentric library and a slightly haunted magical forest, which, to be fair, is exactly what I was aiming for. Not long afterwards, my certificate finally arrived. It looks rather impressive, very official, very serious, very, look at me, I passed. Naturally, I wanted to frame it. Finding the right frame turned out to be almost as difficult as passing the exam. Well, almost. Eventually, I found one that fitted perfectly. I still catch myself looking at it from time to time, not dramatically, just quietly thinking, yes, I really did that. Oddly enough, passing Aiken Grade 1 didn't make me feel as though I'd finished learning English. Quite the opposite. It reminded me how much there still is to learn. These days, I try to read English every day, usually for about 30 minutes, mostly on my Kindle. Lately, I've been reading books by Dale Carnegie. Do I understand every single word? Absolutely not. Do I stop every 30 seconds to look everything up? No. Sometimes I ask ChatGPT, but most of the time I simply keep reading. I've realized it's much better to keep moving than to stop every few lines. I still take online English sessions on Native Camp. I regularly chat with wonderful teachers, mostly from the Philippines. And honestly, that has been one of the biggest game changers for me. Those lessons force me to speak, to explain, to make mistakes, to keep the conversation going. Sometimes I can't think of the right word. Sometimes my grammar falls apart completely. You know that, right? Fortunately, my teachers are wonderfully patient. Every lesson reminds me that English isn't something you simply study. It's something you use. Again, again, and again. Looking back, I think that's one of the biggest reasons I've continued improving. Not because I became fearless, but because I kept speaking anyway. Many years ago, I scored 920 on the TOEIC. At the time, I was absolutely delighted. Now, I'd quite like 950. Human beings are wonderfully greedy, aren't they? I haven't booked the exam yet, but I've already started working through practice questions. So here we go again. Another exam, another pile of books, another entirely reasonable excuse to buy even more stationery. I'm beginning to suspect that collecting notebooks may actually be my real hobby. When I passed Aiken Grade 1, I thought I'd reached the finish line, but I haven't. I'd simply reached another starting line. There's still so much I'd like to improve. My vocabulary, my pronunciation, my reading speed, my speaking, everything. And strangely, I rather like that. Because English has become much more than an exam. It's become one of my favorite hobbies. And I hope it stays that way for the rest of my life. If you're studying for Aiken or IELTS or TOEIC, or simply learning English because you enjoy it, don't worry about being perfect. And if your speech didn't go as well as you hoped, please don't lose heart. Mine only scored 5 out of 10. Yet somehow I still passed. The interview doesn't judge only one moment. Interaction matters, grammar matters, vocabulary matters, pronunciation matters. Everything counts. Sometimes one weaker section is simply balanced by stronger ones. So keep going. You may be much closer than you think. And finally, sometimes passing by 1 point is still passing. I can personally recommend it. Thank you so much for watching this little series. It honestly means a great deal to me. This may sound a little strange, but the excitement I felt after passing the exam was rather like winning the lottery. The only difference was that I had to study for months before I was even allowed to buy a ticket. When I finally saw the word pass, I thought, so this must be what winning the lottery feels like. Honestly, I was that excited. I'm Mellow. Take good care of yourself. Keep enjoying English. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. Ta-ta!